evaluating when answering this question? What's that?
The increase in density.
Density, right? The question asks about density. Is the only information given density? No. So you need to generate a selective vision. Selective vision is something that is very important, right? And not just in chemistry. There's a bunch of excess information here that I don't care about. Right? So density, cool, there's an increase in density. There could also be a decrease in density. Right? The density could not change. Just because the density increases, decreases, or doesn't change isn't particularly relevant. What does that density change have to be related to? Temperature? Is there a temperature change?
No.
Does the question ask about temperature? No. What does that change need to be related to? Is it just asking for density?
Yes.
Mass.
Right? So let's say the question was just asking density. What is a reasonable density? Now it is only asking about density. What is a reasonable density?
For what?
You're like, for what? Exactly. It's not just asking density.
Is that the density?
Density for something else. It's not just that the density is changing. Yes, the density is changing. But if I don't know what to tie that change to, utterly meaningless. Does that make sense? Okay. So we need that context for potassium. What else do we need to know when we bring in now the potassium? So where's there more information on this list? Okay, grams/milliliters. Does that have anything to do with the secondary context given below? It says for potassium. Okay. Is potassium found somewhere on that chart?
No.
No. Okay. What information is found there?
The other elements
Some other elements.
and their weight.
Okay.
Density.
Their densities. Okay, so it's now showing the relationship between some elements and densities. Is potassium an element?
Yes.
What is potassium's relationship to the elements that are identified?
It comes between.
So there's a question we have to answer to be able to start this. We have to know what for potassium. Not necessarily where it's located yet. You're right. Okay, because these, you can see their relationship, right? How do you see their relationship?
They're all elements.
They're all elements, yes. And
Their densities are similar to each other.
They're all in the same group.
they're all in the same group on the periodic table. We're tying in multiple pieces of information. That periodic table is a secondary piece of information that you have. And if we look, Li, Na, Rb, Ca, they're all in the same group, that same column. Okay? What does potassium have to do with those?
It's between sodium and.
How do you know potassium is between sodium? Yes.
Because we know that the symbol would be K.
We know the symbol of potassium is K. We know that because you've memorized that. You have to have that context memorized. Okay? So again, I'm really trying to point out all of the individual steps you have to know along the way. Okay? So potassium comes in as a K. Okay? We could use some contextual clues of how this table was formatted, okay, to draw inferences that perhaps K would be in that gray box. We've got a periodic table to prove that. Is that true? Yeah, okay, so K is happening somewhere in that middle area. Okay, now with that information, now we can look at the densities and say what happened to those densities. Lithium, sodium, potassium, rubidium, cesium happens to follow exactly off the periodic table, down that column, right? So as we go down that column, what happened to the densities? They increased, right? So what density would you expect for potassium?
115, 1.15, 1.20, somewhere around there.
1.15, 1.20. Does anybody have any other guesses?
1.25.
1.25. Where are you guys getting those numbers from? Okay? You're splitting the difference between those, saying that whatever that value is has to be somewhere in between. Right? Okay? Can you all look at the back wall for a second, because Greg has something interesting to tell you.
Hello there. How are you doing?
Okay, now you can come back. So, if we were given that information in the table, multiple choice answers,
Okay, yeah.
what's our answer?
D possible to
B, 1.23. Okay, so we're hearing an impossible to tell. If it was impossible to tell, would you have been able to give me a number of 1.05 to 1.25? No, it's not impossible to tell. You have the data to be able to come up with a reasonable guess. Yeah? Cool. So 1.23. Why did I make you all turn around and look at the other wall? So that I could magically erase something from the bottom of the table. Okay? I had to do that erasing because I didn't look at the footnote properly, and I just blocked out the density, because this was an interesting one to talk about, and then I forgot about the stupid footnote, and someone was like, but the footnote says, I'm like, gah. Okay? So there we go. What does that mean about your answer that it was B? Really?
Well, you asked for a reasonable density, so we didn't know it was less.
So it is a reasonable density.
Is it a reasonable density based off the information that was given?
Yes.
It was a reasonable guess.
Absolutely. Your answer is not wrong. Given the context of that information, you are absolutely correct.
What?
Because it didn't ask for the density.
Yeah.
Okay? What is a reasonable density given that information? Given the information you had at hand, a reasonable density was 1.23. How would you know 1.23 was wrong? You knew that other information. So if you memorize all of the facts in the world, you will always be correct. Does anybody anywhere know all of the facts in the world? Does anything know all? I get potentially a bit philosophical, and I didn't mean to go there. Okay, but if we went with Google, you go, oh, Google knows. You mean Google doesn't have mistakes in it? Okay, it does. There's tons of mistakes in there. Okay, so there's no thing, potentially, sort of barring secondary conversations, that knows everything absolutely. We have to use the information that's given to us to make those claims and decisions. So on an exam, B, 1.23 is absolutely the correct answer. Okay? That does not mean the absolute answer for potassium is 1.23. But given the information I have, science, that is my hypothesis.
So we can say A as an answer if we say like...
So, and you might notice, A is an answer. Is A a valid answer?
What if I say I remember in class you said that it was slightly less, but I don't remember that.
It was slightly less. Is 0.72 slightly less than 0.97?
Yes.
Slightly?
That's a jump.
No, that's a pretty significant jump.
All right.
0.72 doesn't come close.
Okay.
Okay? So when I build multiple choice questions like this, where I want you to analyze things, and it may not match the actuality, I make darn sure the actuality is not one of your answer choices. Because some random jerk is going to have memorized some random fact and be like, well, this is the answer. And you will have entirely defeated the point of analyzing the results in front of you.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I was right now that you're...
Okay? So you have to analyze the results in front of you. Make sense? Okay, so a reasonable density is absolutely 1.23. Turned out to not be true in this case. Was Thompson's plum pudding model a reasonable model? Yes. Was it a correct model? No. But given the data at hand, it was a reasonable model. With more data, we can improve the model. Okay? So, I do also throw that out there because that's kind of neat, because if we think back to, what's his name, Mendeleev, he was able to predict properties, right? Including things like density. There's weird exceptions, and he's able to nail down these densities pretty well. That's kind of cool. Okay? Predicting chemical properties. All of the alkali metals, when they react with oxygen, have the general formula M2O. What is M? Metal. What is the 2? I need 2 metals. O for oxygen. So we don't have to stress about the naming of this at all, but that's our basic composition. So if I react any of those metals in that first column with oxygen, it's going to produce a compound. That compound will have the formula where I need 2 metals and 1 oxygen. So if we go through and look, there we go. All of the oxides have those formulas. If we switch to a new metal, do we expect a new formula or a same formula?
Same
Well, same with the change to the metal name.
So let's look at a magnesium oxide. Would I expect magnesium oxide to have the formula Mg2O?
Yes.
Okay. Members of a,
Alkaline metals.
Alkaline.
all the way up to the top, members of a family have similar chemical properties. Is magnesium in the family of the alkali metals?
No.
No. It is in the family of the alkaline earth metals. Because it is in a different family, what does that mean about our predictability with the information given?
It'll be different.
We don't know. It could be different. It could be the same. We don't have enough context to be able to make a conclusion. Okay? Within a family, they're the same. If you're outside the family, who knows? Okay? I might get in fights with my brother. That doesn't mean I'm going to get in fights with somebody else's brother. Okay? So within a family, those relationships establish the same. Okay? So this can be shown kind of graphically, and you'll notice that you get some differences. If we take a look at lithium and I throw it into metal, we get this kind of response. A little gif of it floating around, right? There's a little bit of light, and it's just fizzing around. We see some gas. If we move up to, I believe, sodium, it's a little bit more violent, but we're still getting that light response, and it's still fizzing around, right? If we move up to potassium, similar response. A little bit of light. You might say, isn't that a little bit larger? It is a little bit of a bigger response, but it's the same general pattern. Lights, fizzing, gas. Rubidium. It's a much larger response, but we're still getting lights, fizzing, gas. In that case, the gas was so much that we're getting a minor explosion. Cesium, so much of an explosion that it blows out the container. We're getting very similar chemical responses, okay, in the same vein. Okay. The scale of those responses may change, but we're getting the same type of response in each case. I didn't do these. These were internet. Okay? So let's think about how we could be tested on this. Okay? So I don't want you to write a question on this because it takes too much time to think about this. Okay? How could I write a question? Okay? We're going to be super vague on this with the language. So I want the formula for aluminum when it reacts with oxygen. Okay? So if I did that, what I'm asking for is AlXOY. What is X equals something, Y equals something? What are X and Y with that information?
The amount of molecules. The numbers of atoms.
Okay. So let's go through and show some formulas. I gotta think through this carefully. I'm not gonna think through it carefully. Oh well.
I'm already confused. So pick aluminum.
Pick.
Is non-alkaline metal.
Ah, interesting. If I just ask the question, what is the formula for the aluminum oxide? And these are your 4 answer choices.
Then none of them, right?
We have no idea. Okay? Because what would we need?
Context.
We would need the context. And in particular, what context do we need?
What is the reasonable?
Maybe some examples of the same group.
Some examples in the same group. Right? So what if I wrote out
We can say it's the third option.
now you say it's the third option. Are any of those other answers reasonable answers?
No.
No. Do you have to know any chemistry?
No.
No.
No. So that's a dumb question.
Oh, okay.
And this one's just stupid. You laughed. I like it. Why'd you laugh?
Because it is as random as it was beforehand.
Like there's no relation.
Okay. It's as random as it was beforehand. What is the pattern that you need to know?
What is?
The family. Where is magnesium on the periodic table? Is it in the same family as aluminum?
No.
No. Which means that formula is useless information. How about sodium?
Different form, different family.
Different family. My pattern doesn't hold. Useless information. Is gallium?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so that's useful. Sulfur?
No.
No. What does that mean?
Gallium.
Gallium's the answer. Why is this now a better multiple choice question?
Because it has more chemistry, because you need to know the family.
You need to know that family relationship. Every single one of those, as potential presentations, have a match as a multiple choice answer. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if you didn't know that the family was important, okay, sulfur versus aluminum, they're in the same row, right? So, because they're in the same row, aluminum must have the same formula because that formula showed up, right? So I could say AlO4. Okay. The formulas as a general format match. There is a parallel in the given information with the answer choices. Okay? You have to know a specific piece of information to allow you to answer that. That specific information was what?
The families.
Information in the families. You then can recognize that sulfur is useless and should be eliminated from your answer choices.
But they're all in the same period too, though.
They are all in the same period, which is what makes it tricky.
Yeah.
That says members of
Family.
a family, not period. Okay? So it becomes tricky because you as a human will look for patterns and be like, oh, those are in the same row, so that must be a pattern. That pattern is invalid. It's only within the family. That's why you have to know that content. Kind of makes sense? Okay? This adds a layer of kind of trickery behind it because you have to know the chemistry to answer the question. Okay? And we have, oh, never mind, we don't have an issue, so I will continue on. Periodic trends. Okay, so this is a fast one that we're going to do. There's trends all throughout the periodic table. One of them has to do with atomic radius. Okay? If I asked you size, what does that mean to you? If you were asked to describe someone's size, how would you describe it? Big or small? Okay? Am I big or small? Be careful. I'm tall. Okay, that's it?
Skinny.
Yeah, you're
Is big the same thing as defining tall and skinny? No. Those could be entirely different things. You could be tall and fat. You could be short and fat. Those are two different descriptors. So when we're talking about size, we have to be careful with the language that we're using and what that means. Because when you think of size, that's very vague. In chemistry, size is not vague. Size is very particularly referring to one thing. Okay? In the case of the human analogy, size is referring to height. What is the height for an atom? It's radius. Okay? What particle contributes to the radius?
Electrons.
Okay? So the nucleus is a bit of an interesting answer because the nucleus is not a particle. A nucleus is a combination of particles, protons and neutrons. If we say the atom is the superdome, how big was the nucleus?
This is a marble.
A marble inside it. So is the nucleus contributing to the size?
No.
No. What's contributing to the size?
Electrons.
The electrons. So if we are now looking for trends for atomic radii, the particle that we're concerned about thinking about is electrons. Okay? So there are two trends. Those two trends can correspond to what on our periodic table?
The location.
What about the location?
That the further down, the larger they would be?
So further down, useful,
I don't know, maybe the period?
and the period. There's literally two directions. It's a grid. Okay? You get left, right, horizontal rows, okay, or periods, and the vertical, up, down. That's your two trends. Okay? Up, down, left, right. Which one do you want to look at first? Say up, down.
Up, down.
Okay. What happens to the number of electrons as we go down a column?
There's more on the
There's
valence
more
of the
electrons,
shell.
right? So what would you expect to happen to the size?
Larger size.
Largest, more electrons, bigger, right? Yes. Absolutely true. As you go down, it gets bigger. Okay, or as you go up, it gets smaller. Okay, which becomes confusing because depending on which direction you go, your answer changes. So you have to make sure your language is consistent. What happens when we move left, right? So you got a theory for down, right? What was your theory for down?
So farther down you go, the more-
It gets bigger because
there's more electrons.
more electrons. What happens when we move left, right? Yes, it turns into gases, back to our electrons. What happens to the number of electrons as we move left, right?
If you go right,
It
it's
reduces.
What happens to the number of electrons as we go left, right? You still get more. So I heard a couple people throwing out terms, and this is where we have to be careful. Okay? When I go from lithium to beryllium, what happens to the number of electrons?
it gets one more.
Increases.
It increases. Lithium to neon, it increases a lot. Within a row, left to right, we get more electrons. Yeah?
Mhm.
What do you think should happen to the size?
It should go up.
It should go up. And what does it do?
It goes down.
It goes down. Okay? That's very odd. Okay? That single piece of information is actually enough to suggest that our current model for the atom is flawed. The model that we're working with so far is we have electrons, protons, and neutrons. Where are the protons and neutrons?
In the nucleus.
In the nucleus. Where are the electrons?
In the outer shells.
Outside it. Where outside it? Be careful, don't bring in your reading yet. Where are the electrons right now outside of the nucleus?
In the valence shell.
Surrounding it. Where? Anywhere. Okay? That can't be true because our radius is saying something else is going on. Because if they're just anywhere outside, if I put more electrons in, what happens? It gets bigger. It doesn't. Okay? So there's something wrong with our model. To understand that something wrong, we have to dig into where do the electrons exist. Okay? And that's what takes us into chapter 4. Here's a pretty picture on our radius. We will come back to it probably. Okay? There's another pretty picture on our radius. Notice it's a periodic table showing metallic and radius characteristics. Those kind of arrows would be phenomenal things to write on your periodic table when I tell you you can start the exam. Now you don't have to memorize it. They're written there. People are like, oh, I can memorize the trend. There's like 5 trends. Okay? It will be very easy to get them confused. Okay? So write it down. You don't have to memorize it. Okay. Chapter 4, light. Okay, there's a bunch of stuff here. Light has wavelength and it has frequencies. Okay, and there's an energy associated with that light. Okay, wavelength, peak to peak. Frequency, how many peaks show up in a given time frame. Okay, that's what those things mean. Speed of light's up there, big number. Cool, it moves fast. Okay, there's a formula. Energy equals H. That's not a V, by the way, that's nu. Okay, Greek letter for frequency. How many of you want to deal with those calculations? Cool. Worry about it in 151. We're not going to worry about it now. What I want you to know out of it is that light has an energy associated with it. There's a wavelength and a frequency that we can use to monitor some of those aspects. That's it. Okay. When we look at light, okay, it is a small section of the radiant energy spectrum. And officially, light is really referencing the entire spectrum. So when we think light, there's usually an implied word in front of light, which is visible light. Okay? We can detect a very small range of that energy spectrum. Okay? And that's our visible spectrum. Okay? They can get really high energy, cosmic rays, gamma rays. That's how we created the Hulk, right? All the way down to TV and radio waves, which we really don't care about, which is why we listen to so much TV. Okay? Those tend to not affect us. So we can push those out through the air, and the energy associated with them doesn't do anything to us. Does the visible light energy do anything to us?
Allows us to see.
It allows us to see. If it didn't do anything to us, guess what? You can't see. You'd be blind. Okay? So that energy spectrum happens to match certain chemicals in your eye that causes a change in shape. That change in shape is in turn correlated to an image that we then get to detect. Okay? That our brain interprets as an image. Neat. Okay? So what I want you to know from this is the colors in the rainbow. Sort of. What are the colors in the rainbow? Roy G. Biv. So there's no red-orange. There's no lime green. There's no purpley blue. What are the colors in the rainbow?
Everything that you can see.
All the colors. Okay? It's really hard to name all the colors in the rainbow, right? So what did we as humans do?
Simplify.
We simplified it by saying, this is red. This is orange. This is yellow. This is green. This is blue. This is indigo. This is violet. We dropped in random, arbitrary, and they're not perfectly random, but kind of arbitrary delineations on that to simplify what we had to do to represent it. The rainbow covers all energy. Okay? Continuous spectrum, all colors. Okay? But we've gone through and said that it only has these. Okay? So it might be hard to memorize that. So what did we come up with? Okay? We could say the rainbow. We came up with the name. You know, Mr. Roy, the middle name G, last name Biv. Because this helps us to memorize the sequence of colors. Okay? Notice that the sequence is opposite of what's shown below. Okay? The sequencing isn't a big deal. The sequencing that becomes important is making sure they're in the correct relative sequence to each other. The next part that becomes important is knowing the energy associated with them. Okay? Which one is higher energy? Well, which one turned into the Hulk?
Gamma.
Gamma rays. Is our violet closer to gamma or further from gamma?
Closer.
Closer, which means our violet is
Yeah.
higher in energy. Okay, so we could use the Hulk to try and do that, but that then assumes that we've memorized gamma rays and that violet shows up here, not like that. Yeah? Okay, so I wonder if there's a better way. I think there's a better way. Okay, particularly in the state of Arizona, during the summer we tend to get a little bit paranoid. About what? It's not really paranoia because it's actually a valid fear.
The UV index.
The UV index. So when we go outside, what do?
Sunblock.
We put on sunblock, which protects us from
UV.
UV. Why do we need protection from UV?
Skin cancer.
Skin cancer, because it's high energy. It's so high energy, what does it do to your skin? It burns it. It damages the DNA, giving us cancer. Okay? So we put on a block to protect that ultraviolet light because it is high in energy. It's causing those mutations. Which light is closer to ultraviolet? Violet or red? Some people, the process, that's okay.
I thought you were going to say indigo.
Violet! Violet is closer to ultraviolet, which means violet is high energy, which thereby means red is low energy. Okay? That's what I want you to nail down with your spectrum. Okay? Your sequence of your colors, and then recognizing that red is low energy and violet is high energy. Okay? So cool. By this time in history, why is Greg doing that in the back of the room? That's kind of weird. By this time in history, okay, we've got electricity, we've got vacuums, okay, and we like playing with things, right? Anybody had those little finger buzzers as a kid or heard of them? It's kind of entertaining. You go up and shake hands and you shock the person you're shaking hands with and you get a good old laugh out of it, right?
Yes, always.
Okay? Okay? Electricity. This is fun. We get to shock people and see what happens. Okay? So we thought that was cool to do it to people. What else should we do it to? Elements. Okay? It's hard to do that to an element, so we have to isolate the element. So we take our tube, we pull all the air out of it, and then we put just a little bit of our element into it. Okay? And then I attach the cattle prod to it. Pump 20,000 volts into it and say, hey, what happens to it? Does it laugh and think it's funny too? Okay? And instead, what it spits out is this purple light. Oh, cool. Hydrogen spitting out a purple light. I've also played with prisms. What might I expect when that purple light hits the prism? What do prisms do? They split the light. I see purple light. What would I expect to see if this was my prism?
Red and blue.
It's purple light. What would you expect to see? Purple light. Red and blue, you can be like, that's the combination. That's cool. Primary colors and all that. That's great. But do we have purple on our spectrum? Yeah. We would expect to see purple. Okay? What purple should we see? Well, the purple that represents that color. So we'd see this big continuous band of purple light. Neat. Except we attach the prism and what do we see? Not that. Okay? What we see is this band of purple light, of green light, blue-green light, and red light. What? That's weird. It's purple light. Why don't I just see a bunch of purple? Okay, as a continuous band out here. Okay. What's happening when I pump the 20,000 volts in? It's 20,000 volts of what? Electricity, right? So if it's electricity, what are those electricity things causing to move? Electrons. So we've got our small atoms in there, and the electrons are moving around. Remember, our theory is that the electrons just exist anywhere. So if I look at a nucleus, and that's all my atom, my electron can exist here, it could exist up here, here, anywhere in there. If I pump 20,000 volts in, what happens? The electron jumps. Okay? And you're like, that sounds weird. Under one of your seats, because you guys have been very good about consistently sitting in the exact same place, we put a little electric buzzer. Okay? Somebody knows it's not his. Okay? And if we push that button to say go, what's going to happen? You're going to jump. The exact same thing happens in an electron. I didn't do that. I could get fired for that probably. Okay? You're going to jump. Okay? Eventually, if we did it as a mild enough shock, what would you do once you jumped up?
Not go back to that spot.
You might not go back to that spot, but you're probably going to...
Get used to it.
Oh, come on now.
Throw the chair away to me.
Okay, you throw the chair away, fine. And now you're just going to stand there for the rest of the class?
Grab a chair.
You grab another chair and you
Sit down.
sit back down.
And you press the button.
You go in up and
Down.
you go back down. What caused you to go up?
Electricity.
The 20,000 volts. When you come back down, that energy had to get released somewhere. You threw a freaking chair. We saw that. Guess what happens to the electron? It throws that energy, says that sucks, and it throws it, and then it sits back down. What did it throw that energy off as?
In this case,
Visible light.
Oh.
Okay? That's the color that we're seeing from this. If our electron can exist anywhere around the atom, how many different jumps are possible?
Infinite.
An infinite amount. Which means when we look at our atomic line spectrum, what would we expect to see? An infinite amount of possibilities in the purple area. A band of colors. Lots and lots, a full range. What do we see instead? Single lines. What does that mean about our theory about where the electrons exist?
There is one spot.
It's false. The electrons must exist in
They said
particular spots.
like a set particular spot.
And they can jump from one spot to another spot, but it's another particular spot. The difference in energy between those spots is what we're seeing in our visible line spectrum. That's that's electronic structure. Okay? Bohr was the one that went through and observed this, or not necessarily observed it, but theorized what was going on with it, and he went through and said these are orbits. Okay? This model of orbits you've probably seen before, okay, where you go, oh, well, there's 2 here, and we get 8 out here. That model is complete and utter crap. It is useful for an elementary school, maybe junior high, and it should entirely disappear from the curriculum afterwards. Okay? Some people may laugh because they'll be like, that's what my biology teacher told me. This is why biology teachers should teach biology and not freaking chemistry. Okay? They don't understand what's going on with it, and they're using outdated models to explain what they're observing. Okay? So we're going to modify this because I don't like looking at that orbits because it perpetuates that false concept. They are still different energies. So what we're going to do is kind of erase the majority of that circle because we aren't looking at circles. We're saying that the electrons can exist at energy levels. Those energy levels can correspond to a difference in length away from the nucleus. Yeah? So when we look at hydrogen, what happens is that hydrogen electron needs to go into one of these energy levels. Well, where is it going to go? Closest to the nucleus. Why?
Because it's on the far left and up.
No.
Because it's small, you need more electrons to get bigger. Right? No, wrong. Close.
The energy level is different, so you're saying we should place it in here. I like your term of energy level.
We place it closer to the nucleus because it's giving off like a larger amount of energy and it has more range of jump.
When you all came in here, how many of you just stood for the last lecture? Why not? Because you're lazy. What did you do? You sat down because that is easier. That is lower in energy. Guess what electrons are doing? They're sitting down. They're going to go to their lowest acceptable energy state. You could be even lower and lie on the floor, right? That doesn't quite cut it for acceptable. Okay? So that's what our electron's doing. It's jumping to its lowest energy state. We're getting placed at its lowest energy state. Then I put it in this tube, and it's like, oh, this is cool. I'm in this floating tube, and then I shove 20,000 volts in it. What happens when you get hit with 20,000 volts? You stand up. You jump to a higher energy state. So this pushed me up. This is my 20,000 volts. Okay, I'm now at a higher energy state. That freaking hurt. Throw the chair. But now I sit back down. Here's my chair being thrown. Which is convenient here, and we'll see this in a second. This just dawned on me. Throw the chair. There it goes. And we sat back down. that looks an awful lot like H nu, that chair has an energy associated with it. If that energy happens to match the energy between red and violet, what do we get? Visible light. Okay? 20,000 volts, we jump, we throw our chair, we sit back down. That thrown chair is now what observes everywhere else. Okay? And that's what we see as humans. Okay? That's what's happening. Okay? If our electrons could exist anywhere and could go to anywhere, we don't see particular energies. We see all energies. Because we're seeing particular energies, there are discrete places where the electron can exist. This is sometimes referred to as the quantum concept. Okay? Discrete energy levels. The comparison, stairs and ramps. Okay? If I go up a stair, can I exist at the step and a half?
No.
No. Why not? What happens if I try to exist at a step and a half?
It's unstable.
I fall and I get to step 1. Okay? So stairs have discrete energy levels. Could I take a step and a half on a ramp?
Yes.
Yeah, because there's a ramp still underneath me. So at all places, I can exist on a ramp. On stairs, I can't exist at all places because I can't step there. Okay? So this is our quantum concept. Quantum is stairs. Okay? A continuous spectrum would be a ramp. The atomic line spectrum that we've now gone to is stairs. They exist at discrete energy levels. The former model was a ramp, okay, where our electrons could exist anywhere on that ramp. Kind of, sort of? Okay. This is our big deal for Bohr. Okay, what does this mean for us? Well, we can look at it a little bit deeper. Again, with the stupid circles. Okay. What Bohr was able to observe or correlate to was how those energies came about. Okay. Fun answer for virtually everything we can't explain, quantum, right? We talked about it. That's what's happening here. There's some crazy advanced mathematics that Bohr was a big part of describing and understanding, okay, to explain why that purple light corresponded to the transition between the 5th energy level and the 2nd. Wait, why was it not the 5th and the 1st? Does the 5th and the 1st not happen for hydrogen?
Wouldn't it be like the neutrons and protons on the first
Because it
level?
wasn't emitting the energy at the first level because it was low energy, or it wasn't emitting enough to.
Where did our electrons start? You're going the right direction, right idea, wrong direction. Where did our electrons start?
The lowest acceptable energy?
It started at the first energy level. I put 20,000 volts in, where does it go?
Highest possible, or,
Any one of the higher possible levels, depending on where it jumps. So let's just say it jumps to the 5th. So what I'm asking is, why did we not see 5th to 1?
Because the first one is occupied by the proton.
Nope, the proton's in the nucleus. It's not there. The first energy was where our electrons started. Why did I not see the 5th to the 1st transition?
Because the energy is lowering down, or it lowers down, but not the whole thing.
The energy lowers down. I'm not quite sure. And that's where Joe was going too. Right idea, wrong direction.
Oh, it's higher?
Purple light was 5 to 2. Is the 5 to 1 jump larger or smaller?
Larger.
It's larger. What is larger in energy than our violet light? Gamma, cosmic, ultraviolet. And we can see all those, right?
no,
No. That transition is happening. I can't see it.
it's not our visible spectrum.
Right? It's not in our visible spectrum. It's not that it doesn't happen. It's that I can't see it.
So you can prove it.
Right? We can build devices to prove that transition happens. Right? Because we can build devices to detect that energy. Okay? This is why we know there's ultraviolet light, because we can detect ultraviolet light. We can see those repercussions. We just can't visibly see it. What we visibly see is the 5 to 2. Okay? What happens to the 4 to 2? Is that a smaller jump or a bigger jump? Smaller jump, which means the energy for that should be less. What color do we become?
Blue-green.
We shift to our blue-green, which is less. Exactly right, which is why we can see that transition. If we jump to the 2 to 1 transition, is that jump bigger or smaller? Smaller, which means less energy. 3 to 2, thank you. Red. That's why the different lights, colors are happening. The other transitions still occur, but the energy gap between those transitions is either too large for our visible eye or too small. So the atomic line spectrum just correlate to the ones that we can see.
So what would we register as a 2 to 1?
Well, and so this is where this chart becomes difficult, is it's not to scale. Okay? So that 2 to 1, you might say, well, isn't that the same or different, somewhere between the 3 to 2 and the 5 to 2? Yeah, in this diagram, but this diagram's not to scale. Okay? So that becomes more challenging to deal with. I'm pretty sure that 2 to 1 hits way out in the ultraviolet. Okay? The difference in energy between those is pretty astronomical. It's big. Okay? So, atomic fingerprints. Every element that I test generates different line spectrum. Don't they all have the same orbitals? Don't they have the same energy levels?
No.
Well, they're still all going to have energy levels. And I'll have a first and a second and a third and a fourth energy level. Why would I get different colors coming out? What changes when I go through those elements?
The amount of electrons.
Say that again? Way too far out.
The amount of electrons.
The amount of electrons. How is the amount of electrons going to change it? We're talking about electrons jumping, right? What happens if I bring in a second electron? Does that change the energy of the first electron?
No. It's just a second.
It doesn't change the energy. So if I take the north end of a magnet and I bring it near the north end of the magnet, I don't see any changes in energy. It still acts just like a north end of a magnet. They repel. Did it change the energy? Yes. I bring an electron near another electron, the energy changes. If the energy changes, what happens to my atomic line spectrum? It changes. What else changes as I go through this structure? Atomic. What's that?
The colors.
Yeah, keep going. What else changes when we move from hydrogen to helium? Yes, the number of electrons. I completely agree.
That you see more?
You don't see more always as you move through. Look at sodium.
The amount of NM, I don't know what it is. What is it? It says
Oh,
700
no, that's the wavelength.
The atomic radius.
Atomic radius is still our electrons. What changes? Hydrogen to helium. What's the difference?
Nucleus?
The nucleus is different. Helium has more protons than hydrogen. If it has more protons, that first energy level, that first energy level is where the electron exists. If there's more protons, what happens?
Should be tighter.
It's going to be tighter. That means the energy level
Is lower.
changed, which means
The light spectrum.
the atomic line spectrum will also change. There's so many things changing as we move through that the atomic line spectrum will change for every single element, which is why we can reference them as atomic fingerprints. I can break down the light of anything into the atomic line spectrums, and I can determine what elements were present behind that. Why is that extra cool? I can aim a telescope at another planet, and I can break down the light spectrum, and I can determine what elements are on that planet. Astronomy. Wicked cool. Okay? So, where this ends up going to kind of a big extent is our electron homes. Okay? We get energy levels. This is what Bohr was telling us. How many energy levels do we get? 7. Okay? The highest one up there is actually the vacuum. It is so far away from the nucleus, the electron is no longer attached to the atom. Okay? You'll notice that as we go up in energy, the spacing between the orbitals gets smaller. Okay? That's because We want to be as close to the nucleus as possible, but the previous shell of electrons pushes them away. Okay? So it has to get a little bit further away. The further out we get, they can get closer to each other because we're starting to run out of space on the outside. Okay? And once we hit the vacuum, we're gone. Okay? So we get 7 energy levels. Yes?
Wait, so is this completely different from like the electron configuration we do? Or?
This is where our electron configurations come from. The electron configurations didn't just come into being. The electron configurations are referencing where the electrons exist. There are energy homes. If we take a look at the periodic table, does anybody see a set of 7? Anybody see a set of 7 on the periodic table?
No nitrogen.
Noble gases? What do you mean? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah? I heard another one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many rows are on the periodic table? Rows being horizontal, or our periods. There's 7. Aren't there 9? What are these?
Those are part of 6 and 7.
These are inserted into 6 and 7. How many rows are there? 7. How many energy levels are there? 7. Guess what? The periodic table has the electron homes embedded in it. Every row corresponds to an energy level. Okay? How many electrons would I expect to be able to put into an individual orbital? What happens when I put an electron near an electron? They repel. So how many electrons should I be able to put in? 1. How many electrons could I put into my diagram right now? 7. Does that explain 118? No, my model sucks. Okay? First step in the model, quantum theory, you just kind of have to accept it. We can fit 2 electrons into an orbital. Why? Electrons spin opposite directions. So I can put 2 electrons into one orbital as long as they spin different directions. So every orbital holds 2 electrons. Cool! Instead of having 7, I now have 14. Is that 118? No, my model still sucks. Okay? As we move up in energy, we start adding more layers to this. So we start with an energy level. We then add what I refer to as a type. Okay? An orbital type. At the first energy level, how many orbital types do we get? Rhymes with fun. 1. When we go up to the second energy level, I copy what I had before. Okay? So I get 1 because I copied, and I add a new one. So I get 2. What happens when I move to the third energy level? The fourth. I'm not doing yellow. Yellow's a bad color. Let's... 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 5th. 5, 6, 7, right? Okay. 5. Why? Because yellow's not going to show up on this. Here. I'll do it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, it showed up okay. I lied. Okay? So when we go through and look at these, okay, this one may be one type. This one's going to be the same as that type, right? How could I reference it being the same as that type? Because remember, we copy what happened before. Okay, I could color code it, so this should be black. But if it's black, isn't that going to confuse it with the first energy level versus the second energy level? Yeah, so color coding is going to become awful. Okay, add to that, how many of you have different colors? Yeah, so color coding doesn't work.
Numbers.
The amount of electrons
Not amount of electrons yet. Okay, we could use numbers. Numbers would be a great system to use. Okay, except, what did we name this black one? 1. What did we name the blue one? 2, 3, 4. Why is naming these with numbers problematic?
Because then when we move over to the...
Why is naming things with numbers problematic?
you can get them confused.
What do you mean you can get them confused?
You don't know what it's referring to.
Is the number a numerical value or is it a name? That's where it's confusing. You have to be careful. Those are not numerical values. Those are names. Bob, Sarah, Sam. Okay? if we went through and said we numbered on the other end, that this was 1 and 1, the next blue one we might call 2. That makes sense. I like that. Okay, what becomes the problem with that? What would this orbital be called? 2, 1. 21? 2-1. Okay, I'm now starting to put in multiple numbers that are referencing multiple names. That could get confusing. So what do I try and do? Perhaps using numbers again as names, not such a good idea. I wish we had another symbol system. Let's use letters. So we could call this, instead of being 1, we could call it A, B, A, B, C. Cool, I like that. We can now reference those pieces as distinct. This would be 2A, not to be confused with 1A. Right? That's kind of cool. I could now differentiate these things. ABC would be a phenomenal idea. Don't take a picture yet. Because ABC is not the naming system we used. What did we use instead? I like the idea of using the alphabet.
We used S,
We used
D, and F.
S, SP, SPD, SPDF. Why did we use those letters? I actually don't know the history of that nomenclature system. Okay? But those are the symbols that we associated with each of those. Okay? If we tried, now you can take a picture if you wanted, we're still not done. Okay? If we tried to now account for all of our elements, we'd get a lot closer, but we'd still fall short. So our theory still has a hole with it. Okay? And this is where sometimes those letters can make a little bit more sense, and by sometimes in one case, it turns out for every orbital type, we also get an orbital orientation, which I'm going to put in quotes, because the orientation doesn't hold for the entire sequence, but it does hold for some. Okay? When I ask for an orientation, okay, I asked in the last class, I tried for the orientation of me and realized there were multiple different definitions for orientation, so that didn't work out so well. Okay? But if I asked you to provide the orientation for the chair, what do you have to do? Okay?
You have to be able to see the chair.
Can you tell me the orientation of the chair right now? Why not?
We can't see it.
You can't see it. So when we ask for an orientation, what do you need to have to be able to understand the orientation? A picture of each of these shapes. Okay? Of each of those orbital types. That picture comes from a 95% probability. Okay, so what's happening is the electron exists. Ta-da, there's an electron. Okay? So I go through and I test for the location of an electron billions of times. When I test for it billions of times, I'm going to see all the dots. What do you start to see? Starts to be, is it a circle though? It's a sphere because this is a three-dimensional object. Those electrons populate fairly well within a three-dimensional sphere. Okay? It's not all of them. It covers 95%. But that 95% gives me a shape that I can now associate with it. Sphere is a pretty useful one because S begins with sphere. So the shape for our S type is a sphere. What is the orientation of that? If I took a sphere, I asked you to close your eyes, and then I turned it, would you be able to tell that I turned it? No. So how many orientations do you get? 1. There is only one orientation. There is only one orbital for the 1s. What happens when I move up to the 2s? What shape am I going to get? A sphere. It's going to be a slightly larger sphere. Why should it be slightly larger?
The other one is to fit inside.
It's a second energy. So we could say it fits, the other one has to fit inside. The second energy is further away. It gets bigger. Okay, so I have a larger sphere. How many orientations are possible?
2.
It's still a sphere. What happens with that sphere? Can I tell there's different orientations? Nope. So I get 1. Here's where the fun one comes in, P. Okay? I go through and do the P, and this is what I end up seeing with all my dots. Does that look like a sphere anymore? Looks like a rectangle.
Looks like a figure 8
Yeah, figure 8.
or an hourglass.
The shape name we've given it to it, a dumbbell. Why? If you know German, in German, dumbbell starts with P. And you're like, that's kind of arbitrary. The German scientists contributed a lot to this, so we give them credit, credit where credit's due. If I take that dumbbell, would you be able to tell the orientation changed?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Where is that dumbbell oriented right now?
Standing up.
Yes, we could do standing up. Vertical. Math class, where is it?
Oh.
What? Where is it? I didn't hear it.
On the X or Y.
X or Y. I would argue this is Y, but it's all kind of arbitrary, which means I will see a p orbital on the y-axis. I will see a p orbital on the x-axis, and I will see a p orbital on the z-axis because it's three-dimensional. There's three orientations available for the 2p, or for the p type. What happens when I move up to the third energy level?
You'll have your sphere.
I'm going to have my sphere.
Your dumbbell.
I'm going to have my 3 dumbbells.
And then you're going to add
And now I have to add a new one for that new orbital shape. That new orbital shape drawn horribly there looks roughly like
a clover.
a clover leaf. So being able to recognize the name of what those things are, sphere, dumbbell, clover leaf, is important. Being able to know that SPDFGH officially, okay, are our names is also important to know. Right? How many orientations are possible for that? Pause, don't do that. How many electrons fit into an orbital?
1.
We said 2. Spin up, spin down. Look at the periodic table. Would you be able to separate 2 anything away from the periodic table?
What?
Yeah, the hydrogen and helium.
You could separate hydrogen and helium away from the periodic table. That's awesome. I accept that as a potential. That's separating that row from the periodic table, which gets a little bit weird. So what I want you to do is now step away from hydrogen and helium. You can't use hydrogen and helium. Can you separate 2 anything else from the periodic table?
Yes.
Yes? What
Yeah.
could you separate?
The 2 liquids. No? Sorry.
Not that one.
Okay.
Try again.
The metalloids?
Metalloids. Are there 2 metalloids? No, so you can't do that one. What could you separate as a set of 2 away from the periodic table? What? 2 fudge knuckles. No, because those were embedded inside the periodic table, so I don't accept that either. How many nonmetals are there?
A lot.
A lot more than 2.
Can we separate the staircase to actual table?
Okay, even if we separate the staircase away from it, that's not really 2 elements, right? Or 2 sets. 2 sets. 2 sets. 2 sets.
Oh, the first row and the last row? The families?
2 sets. This is not a row.
No.
Families. Is there 2 families that look like they could be pulled from the periodic table a little bit?
Yes.
Yes. What do you mean?
I don't know, the transition elements and the representative elements.
So we could pull this 2 away. What about how the periodic table shows that these 2 columns could be separated from the rest of the periodic table?
Oh, our metals?
Yeah, this is a weird one because what we're using is what Greg may talk about later when we're talking about visual design. What did I draw in that box?
Water.
Water. What's the formula for water? H2O. Let's modify. Whoa, that was a big erase. Let's modify that a little bit. So we're in that same space, roughly. Is that still water?
No.
What do you mean?
No, because you put space between the hydrogen and 2.
There's a little bit more space there, right?
Yes.
So white space would allow you to differentiate one thing from another. Look at the periodic table again. Do you see any white space that would allow you to differentiate those first two columns from the rest of the periodic table?
Five elements to the top.
Do you see any freaking white space running right through the middle of the periodic table that would allow you to pull those off to the side? Yes. Those first two are separated from the rest of the periodic table. Right? So 2. That was interesting because how many electrons could I fit in this S? 2. We might say 2s. 2s means where did I move though? I'm at the second energy level. Where did I move on the periodic table if I'm the second energy level?
To the
second period.
The second period, just the second row down. So that's not all that useful. Okay, so let's move up to the 2p. The p, how many electrons could I fit in there?
6.
2, 4, 6, yeah? Do I see a set of 6 on the periodic table?
Yes.
There's a set of 6. How many orientations are possible for this? Okay, for an instance, we got rid of this. We got rid of this.
So you got how much are those? 3, 6.
So I'm seeing some people counting on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 in that section that are not represented in those first two columns and are not represented in those 6, yeah? How many electrons can I fit into an orbit?
2.
How many electrons can I fit into an orbit? 2. How many did I address here? 10, which means how many orientations are there for the D? Try again. 5. We had 6 for the P. How many orbits? 3. We had 10 for the D, which means how many orbits? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is there another section of the periodic table? The 2 lines on the bottom. Remember, these 2 elements were insertions from here, so to get rid of those, how many do you see?
14.
14. How many orientations are possible for the F? 7. Wow. All of that information is encoded in the periodic table. You don't have to memorize it. You have to know how to interpret it from the periodic table. That's pretty freaking cool. When we talk about electron configurations, what are electron configurations? It's taking this diagram that I just drew and identifying the location for every single electron for that element. For nitrogen, how many electrons are there? 7. Where should I place the first electron for nitrogen?
In the sphere. First sphere.
The first sphere. I can accept that. Do we have a better name than first sphere? It's the first energy level. It's an S type. Where's the next electron go?
In the same sphere.
In the same sphere, because each orbital holds 2 electrons. Where did it go?
In
1 in S. Where's the next electron go?
2p. Or 2s.
2s. Where's the next electron go?
2p. Or yeah, 2s.
2s. Where's the next electron go?
2p.
2p. Next electron. Next electron. 2p. That looks a bit silly to write out for every single element, right? That's explaining where all the electrons are. Could you condense that a little bit? I have a 1s. How many times did I write that 1s?
2 times.
1s, 2. How many times did I write 2s? 2. How many times did I write 2p? 3. What is 2 plus 2 plus 3?
7.
7. How many electrons went into nitrogen?
7.
Whoa!
I was seeing you on Tuesday about this.
Okay?
Oh,
Okay? The next big concept you need for Lewis structure is valence electrons. Your valence electrons correlate to the highest energy level electrons. Okay, so when we write out your electron configuration, your valence electrons for nitrogen, anything with a 2 in front of it is the highest energy level. How many electrons are in that? How many electrons went into the 2s?
2.
How many electrons went into the 2p?
3.
How many valence electrons are there?
5.
5. Now you can do Lewis structure. Watch the Lewis structure video. We've got a sizable amount of stuff to kind of play around with our electron configurations a little bit and identifying them, but then it's Lewis structure. That's all on Tuesday. I want Tuesday to be largely practice, not talking about background. Watch that video. You will bomb exam 3 or exam 1 on Thursday if you don't, or if you haven't prepared for that content. Kind of, sorta?
Yeah.
You got it.